Hi, I'm Harlan Green. I'm with the LGBTQ archive at the Addlestone Library at the College of Charleston. Obviously not in the library today, but out here on the streets of the city. You might look around these streets and you'll see plaques and monuments to all parts of the city's history, but you won't see anything relating to our community's history. And that's what we're doing in the archive, why we're compiling materials and why we're doing research to prove that Charleston has a very long and storied LGBTQ history right here. Specifically at this corner, I'm standing at the corner of Broad and Meeting, the four corners of law, where four different branches of government have their buildings represented here. Right behind me is the federal courthouse. And the federal courthouse represents the ruling in 2015 that gave LGBTQ people the right to marry. And this year in 2020, it also ruled that LGBTQ people are included under the 1964 Civil Rights Act and protecting us from employment. But if you look across the street at what is now the county courthouse, the history there is not quite so happy. This once was the British seat of royal government. And in the 1550s, Britain had made buggery, which is the term that they use for non-procreative sex, a crime. That's the 1550s. And in 1712, the colony of Carolina followed suit, and it remained on the law books until 1868. So you could actually be put to death. It was a capital crime for being queer in South Carolina, the longest reign of any such law in the United States. Happily, it's not so bad today. And then if we cross the street and see City Hall, that unfortunately has been the site of many anti-gay laws as well. But it's also been the site more recently of good ones. In 1868, there was a law passed against cross-dressing. You could be arrested for appearing in clothes of a member of the opposite sex. But in 2018, Charleston passed a hate crime bill. And so we are actually now a city with a hate crime bill in a state that does not have one. And finally, across the street is St. Michael's Church, the oldest church building left in town. And it's also the site for a battlefield for gay rights. South Carolina likes to secede. We left the Union in 1860, and in the 20th century, congregations like St. Michael's seceded from the Episcopal Diocese of South Carolina in a way, not over slavery, but over the issue of ordaining women in gay marriage. This congregation may not sanction it, but you know what? Just right down Broad Street is the probate court, and that's where in 2015, the first lesbians in the city of Charleston took out their marriage license and got married. So although there are no signs or plaques, you can see that LGBTQ history was, is being, and will continue to be made right here. Just a block away from the four corners of law is 38 Chalmers Street. This little brick house was built in the 1840s for a free woman of color named Jane Whiteman. But we're here because of another remarkable woman, a lesbian who helped change the city of Charleston. That was Laura Mary Bragg. Miss Bragg was not born here, but born in Massachusetts in 1881. She came to Charleston in 1909 to work at the Charleston Museum, which then was housed on the College of Charleston campus. She helped move the institution to a new site, and she became director of the Charleston Museum in 1920, the first woman to head such a scientific natural history museum in our country. She was discreet in her love affairs with women, probably because she had to be. She raised enough eyebrows just being a woman with what she wanted to do. She could never achieve what she did if she were open about her sexuality. And what did she achieve? Miss Bragg, as she demanded to be called, opened the Charleston Museum to blacks for the first time in its history, and she also founded the Charleston County Public Library. She not only discovered and exhibited many facts about Charleston's past, but she also shaped the future of the city. With people like DuBose Hayward, who wrote the novel Porgy, the basis of the opera Porgy and Bess, and others like Josephine Pinckney, the very gay-friendly novelist who lived right next door to Miss Bragg. She founded the Poetry Society of South Carolina, which helped trigger the era we call the Charleston Renaissance. And it was because of that movement that Charleston has become the artist and tourist mecca that it is today. She was a suffragette and a prime mover in the preservation effort as well. It was in her house that she bought in 1927 that she entertained many cultural leaders who came to town. The writer Carson McCullers, whom we'll mention later on this tour. She also mentored many young people, like the young gay artist Ned Jennings, whose studio was across the street. She offered him work at the Charleston Museum, and when Ned killed himself in 1929, it was Miss Bragg who saved his artwork, many which have homoerotic themes. They would have no doubt have been destroyed by his family. She was a great believer in progress. Museums were not just for preserving history, she believed, but places where people could learn about progress and learn about civilization and go on and help add to that progress and be a link in history. She is one of our unsung heroines, and we remember her and claim her, though there's no memorial here. And as we said, it was in the building across the street, the Confederate home, that the young man she tried to help, Ned Jennings, killed himself over a failed love affair with another young man in 1929. Unfortunately, there are many similar sad stories in our LGBTQ history, and one of the saddest ones is just a few blocks from here. Now I'm standing in front of the house at 14 Queen Street, the site of one of the most tragic episodes in our recent LGBTQ history. In the 1950s, it was the home of two gay men who were roommates. Their names were Jack Dobbins and Edward Odie. Everyone in the neighborhood knew they were gay, and no one seemed to be bothered by it. According to one oral history we have in our LGBTQ archive, people knew it, and this was a live and let live community with actors and many poor people, black and white, living nearby. On Halloween 1958, Jack Dobbins attended an all-male party, and then he went out to the bars on King Street. While there were no gay bars per se, there were those that were mixed and had a gay clientele, as long as we behaved. Mr. Dobbins went to at least two bars that night, the Elbow Room Cocktail Lodge and Club 49, which advertised itself as the gayest spot in town. Somewhere that night, Jack Dobbins met a young man named Jack Mann, a 19-year-old airman dressed in dungarees and a leather jacket, which one gay man noted was the costume favored by male prostitutes. They went to several bars together, and Dobbins paid for all the drinks. Dobbins then asked Mann to come back to this house. He did. And while we know something of what happened next, we will probably never know the whole story. The next day, Dobbins was found dead, murdered, bludgeoned to death by a candlestick. And Mann was back on the airbase, bragging and showing his friends money and possessions that had belonged to the murdered man. Mann was arrested for the murder of Jack Dobbins, and the trial, which began in December, was a travesty. For if people in this neighborhood had a live and let live mentality, the city, state, and country did not. It seemed to many in the courtroom that the victim was being put on trial and not the defendant. Mann's defense attorney focused mostly on the victim, bringing up such damning evidence that Jack Dobbins, the dead man, had not had any girlfriends, but had lots of men over visiting him here, including Citadel cadets. Worse still, he had nude statues in his bedroom and had the audacity to sleep on lavender sheets. All this was touted in the news. Dobbins' roommate was forced to confess that he feared Jack had homosexual tendencies, and that was on trial in that courtroom. On one side, there was this normal, supposedly upstanding young man who accepted drinks from a man and went home with him, and that young man whose mother had come to town to cry over him in the courtroom. He was a member of the military. And on the other side, the dead man was a homosexual and aberrant social menace who made improper advances to that young man. This was an era when queers were considered security risks and possible parts of a communist pact to weaken our country. But the irony is that Dobbins had served in the military too, but no one brought that up in the trial. The jury's verdict was swift. Dobbins' murderer was found innocent and set free. This terrified many gay people in the city, seeing that you could be murdered for being gay and the city would not protect you. I spoke to a gay man, now dead, who was growing up in Charleston then, and he told me he got the message loud and clear. As soon as he could, he left Charleston and did not survive and did not come back here for years. But others were stronger and managed to survive those anti-gay terrors of the 1950s. To follow that story, I'll need to take you to another place in another part of town. I'll see you there shortly. I'm now at 9 College Street on the corner of College and Green. When this used to be streets, long before it became part of the College of Charleston campus, this house was built in the 19th century, and later on it was home to the Book Basement, an incredible bookstore. It was also home to two amazing gay men in the city of Charleston, John Ziegler and Edwin Peacock. They coincidentally were also friends of Laura Bragg, whose house we stopped by earlier, and they were also impacted by the Candlestick murder as well. But there is a lot more to their story. John was born in Manning, South Carolina in 1912 and came here at his aunt's house as a boy. He graduated from the Citadel in 1932 and he founded their literary magazine, The Shako, and even had love affairs there. In 1940, he met Edwin Peacock from Thomasville, Georgia, born in 1910. They fell in love and their relationship lasted 49 years. With World War II starting, John and Edwin enlisted together in the Navy, and they kept in touch. After the war, they came back and opened the bookstore here on the ground floor. That was February 19, 1946, the birthday of Southern novelist Carson McCullers, who had based a gay character in her first novel, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, on Edwin. He had encouraged her when she was just a young girl, and Edwin had introduced her to her husband. Carson McCullers and other famous people would come here over the years, as the bookstore became sort of a stop on the gay Underground Railroad. Famous writers such as Langston Hughes, children's author Maurice Sendak, who summered on Folly Beach, stopped by, as did artist Prentice Taylor. John and Edwin were a committed couple, fairly out in the homophobic 1950s and beyond. They were questioned by the police after the Candlestick murder about the identities of people who might be gay, and the military kept asking them about soldiers and sailors who might be that way. While they were mum on that topic, they were outspoken on civil rights, serving on the city's interracial committee and opening their bookstore to black readers, teachers, and librarians long before others did. This was a cultural crossroads in the city. When the college commandeered this property, John and Edwin moved and continued to improve the city and to support music scholarships at the College of Charleston. John would give nearly $1 million over the years before he died at age 103. He gained fame when a book called Jeb and Dash was published in 1994, a look at gay life in Washington, D.C. in the 1930s. If you look for John in those pages, you'll see that his name has been changed to Nicky Bowen. John went on to write a book of poems dedicated to Owen, Edwin, and his autobiography. All are available in our LGBTQ archives and special collections. John and Edwin's contributions were many, but they also showed you can live an out and committed life despite the horrors of homosexuality, which society demanded you believe. But sadly, when the college wanted to memorialize them, we were not as brave as John and Edwin were themselves. This memorial to them in front of 9 College only calls them business partners, censoring the fact that they were committed to each other and in love for nearly 50 years. You can read more of their story and see images at our new college webpage at discovering.cofc.edu. Now I'll hope you follow me to the site of another love story that crossed race and class lines. It's an important part of our college and our national history. Thank you. Avery Research Center, a few blocks from the main campus of the College of Charleston, was originally built right after the Civil War to educate freed men and women. Over the years, this building played a very important role in Charleston's civil rights history. We know that many LGBTQ people were associated with Avery, both as students and as teachers, but documenting them has been very difficult to do. But we are determined to do that as part of our larger project in the archives at Avery. It's here that this building is now a cultural center, and it's home to the internationally important papers of anthropologist Colin Turnbull and his beloved Joseph Tolles. I'm quoting from the finding aid on Avery's website that describes them and their importance. African-American anthropologist Joseph Tolles was born in Virginia in 1937 and moved to New York City to pursue an acting and writing career. In 1959, he met English anthropologist Colin Macmillan Turnbull, with whom he exchanged marriage vows in 1960, something pretty astonishing. Colin Turnbull was older, white, born in 1924 in England. Educated at Oxford, he joined the Royal Navy, lived in India, and then traveled to Africa in 1951. There he encountered the Mbuti people, the subject of his very famous 1962 book, The Forest People. That book won him praise for his portrayal of the Mbuti people as exemplars of human capacity for goodness and love. In 1959, he became curator of African ethnology at the American Museum of Natural History, and that's where he met Joseph Tolles. He resigned in 1969, claiming that the museum discrimination against him and his partner and other African Americans prompted him to do it. Tolles had started there as a volunteer and went on to get his PhD in anthropology as well. In 1988, Joseph Tolles died from AIDS. Turnbull staged a double funeral with 2 caskets, one representing his own spirit. He spent much of the energy of the rest of his life dedicated to memorializing and drawing attention to Joseph Tolles' legacy. He arranged for Tolles' paper and possessions to be transferred here to the Avery Research Center. After being ordained as a Buddhist monk by the Dalai Lama, Turnbull himself died of AIDS in 1994 and was buried next to Tolles. It's a triumphant and a tragic story simultaneously, but perhaps the most important thing about it is that their story survives here in the archives. Saving stories like theirs is one of the things we do in our LGBTQ archives, and what we try to do on the streets of here in Charleston today to show you that Charleston has always had an incredible LGBTQ history. That's our mission, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need you to contribute LGBTQ materials. We need your oral histories, and we need funds from you as well to keep our project going. If we can do our work with your help, we can prove, as I said, that we do have a great history. And you know what? There'll be monuments to Charleston's LGBTQ history on the streets yet. You just wait and see.